The title says troll, but we've got goblins. Profound words of wisdom.
You can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it.
Infamously bad acting.
Oh my God!
Lazy screenwriting.
We need time for some things to happen.
And some sexy food play. It's Troll 2, but is it watchable? Thank you, studio audience, and welcome everybody to Is It Watchable? I'm your host, Paul. Now, if you're a huge fan of the unflushed toilet water that is 1986's Troll, and we're really hoping that they'd make an even worse and completely unrelated sequel, ta-da! Hollywood back in the 80s loved them some little monsters. From gremlins, to critters, to hobgoblins, to munchies, to ghoulies, to, yep, trolls. It was a whole thing for some reason, that reason, of course, being the huge mountain of money Gremlins made. And money likely led to one of Hollywood's other obsessions during the 80s, sequels. Of course, there were plenty of sequels before the 80s, but like everything else in that decade, it got excessive. And it seemed that every other movie that even made a small profit got a sequel to keep the gravy train rolling. And filmmakers didn't even really need a continuation of the story to justify reusing a title and slapping a Roman numeral on the end of it. A couple of the more famous examples are 1982's Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, where instead of a movie about a bloodthirsty Michael Myers, we got a film about deadly Halloween masks. Then there was The Exorcist 3, which has some passing connections to the first two films, but you really have to squint hard to see them. I should add, though, that both of those films are kind of underrated. Which few would say about this movie, Troll 2, which is no more a sequel to 1986's Troll than it is to Gone with the Wind. It doesn't have any of the same story elements, it doesn't have any of the same characters, it doesn't have any trolls, it doesn't have any good parts. The movie starts with a story about a guy named Peter who's getting chased by goblins after getting lost in the woods. The story is read Princess Bride style to a boy named Josh by his grandfather. While running, Peter falls down and is knocked unconscious somehow. When he finally comes to, there's a beautiful girl with fake freckles who feeds him some weird green stuff. Then he starts bleeding weird green stuff, and the beautiful girl isn't a beautiful girl at all. She's a goblin. And this isn't a story, it's real because his grandpa warns Josh.
Goblins still exist. Your grandpa Seth is telling you.
Then Josh's mom walks in and Grandpa vanishes because he was never really there.
Grandpa Seth has been gone for more than 6 months now. You were at the funeral, and I know it was very difficult for you. It was also very difficult for your father, and for Holly, and for me, his daughter.
And for me, his daughter. This is the movie, folks. We learn that the family is about to leave on vacation to a small town named Nilbog, where, as the father puts it,
just think. We'll be living like our ancestors did. Yeah, we'll be peasants and farmers.
Up in her room, Sister Holly's in the middle of the most 80s workout ever when her boyfriend Elliot sneaks in to put some sweaty moves on her.
I like you. But my family doesn't like you. They say you're good for nothing and that you spend way too much time with your friends.
Oh. Acting! Anyway, Elliot asks Holly if he can join the family on vacation. She agrees on the condition that he doesn't bring his friends along so the two can be alone and get busy in the woods. But the next morning, Elliot is a no-show and the family leaves without him. Holly thinks they should have waited longer and it's a whole big thing, and she and her parents have a heated argument. When the mother has had enough, she demands that Josh lighten the mood with a song.
Joshua, start singing. Come on, sing that song I like so much.
Row, row, row your boat gently down a stream.
Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
Yup, that's one of her favorites. All about the classics, that one. Cut to an RV where Elliot has convinced his friends, Brent, Drew, and Arnold, to join him under the guise that Nilbog is filled with hot, horny girls. Back in the family minivan, Josh has a dream about turning into a plant while his family turns into a bunch of goblins. He wakes up in a panic and his mother offers him a sandwich.
Speaking of eating, do you want some, Joshua?
Okay, another spoiler alert. If you think that the mom is acting a little off and that she might actually be a goblin, she's not. That's just how she acts. Josh spots his dead grandfather on the side of the road and tells everyone he has to throw up. He rushes over to Gramps, who warns him to turn around because Nilbog is a bad place. But when the family backs up to pick up Josh, it's not Grandpa at all. It's just some dirty hitchhiker. When the family arrives in Nilbog, the town is suspiciously deserted. But Dad's not too concerned.
It's normal. This is a farming community. Remember, at this time, and not everybody goes to sleep.
I think his watch might be broken. They pull up to the farmhouse where they're greeted by a strange-looking family waiting on the porch. Okay, I should explain that this vacation involves exchanging house keys with another family. In this case, they're going to stay at this farmhouse in Nilbog, while the farmhouse family is going to stay at their house back in the city. It was a simpler time before Airbnb. After the country family loads up their truck, their son tosses a softball to Josh with an ominous message. Inside, the family finds a feast of weird-looking food which they chalk up to typical country hospitality. But at the window, dead Grandpa tells Josh to do whatever it takes to prevent the family from eating the food. He stops time for 30 seconds so that Josh can think of a way, but instead of using that 30 seconds to, push the food off onto the floor or something, he hops up on the table and straight up takes a whiz on everything. Understandably upset, Michael carries Josh up to his room.
And you can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it!
Back at the RV, the guys are camped out in the woods watching a movie.
I'm sick of this. Where are all the single, unattached, horny girls, Elliot?
Their RV is parked in the middle of the woods, and Dummy is wondering where all the hot girls are. Arnold decides to step outside and, what do you know, spots a hot girl running through the woods. I guess I'm the dummy. He tackles her and finds she's being chased by what he thinks are a bunch of little people in goblin costumes. One of them spears him in the chest and the two run to a nearby church to escape. Inside they meet a woman named Credence who is clearly enjoying her screen time.
I am Credence, Leonor Gielgud of ancient Druid origins.
They ask her to take them to a hospital, but instead she gives them a special potion. They're stupidly cool with that and soon after are violently ill, and then the girl goes upstairs for some reason. While up there, she turns into a green mush and a bunch of goblins run in and start eating her.
They're eating her! And then they're going to eat me!
Oh my God!
Acting! Meanwhile, back at the farmhouse, Holly does the most 80s dance ever before her grandfather appears in the mirror looking for Josh. Holly runs out of the room screaming and Josh agrees to switch rooms with her. Grandpa then appears to Josh and gives him this warning.
You have to convince them to leave here. This is an evil place. It is the kingdom of the goblins.
But why don't you tell my mommy and daddy these things?
They don't listen to me. Your mother has never taken my advice.
Dude, you're dead. If you appeared to your daughter from beyond the grave with some advice that could save her life, I think you'd find her pretty agreeable. Back at the RV, Arnold is still missing, and worse, the boys don't have any food.
There's nothing. Guys, didn't anyone remember to bring supplies?
We left in too much of a hurry, Drew. Going to town to do the shopping now.
Okay, now I've got to be careful with how I put this, but follow me. We've got this teenage boy, Elliot, who has a teenage girlfriend, Holly, who has invited him to go on vacation with her. She tells him that she'll allow him to round all the bases and slide into home as long as he doesn't bring his friends along. Now, I was once that age. I remember what it's like to have raging hormones. I might have straight up murdered my friends for an opportunity like that. But not Elliot. Instead of getting it on with Holly, he'd rather hang out with his buddies in a stinky RV and wake up in the mornings like this. I just think he might be a little confused. So Drew decides to give Elliot and Brent some privacy and heads out to get some food. The local sheriff spots him and gives him a lift, and also a disgusting looking sandwich because people in this movie will eat anything. The sandwich of course makes him sick, and by the time he gets to the general store, he's got the green sweats.
Can I help you?
Coffee.
There's no coffee here in Nilbog, it's the devil's drink!
Eggs. Bacon.
Are you crazy, boy? We're vegetarians here in Nilbog. Didn't you know that?
Best performance in the whole movie. Outside, Drew is stopped by some townfolk to tell him that Arnold wants to meet him at the old church in the woods. Over at the church, we see that Credence has prepared a delicious-looking cheesecake or flan or something to take to the family, and also that Arnold has been turned into a potted plant. At the farmhouse, the family is also experiencing a food shortage, so Michael and Josh head into town. But once there, they find that the store is closed until after the sermon, so they decide to wait. Then, in one of cinematic history's greatest plot twists, we learn that Nilbog is goblin spelled backwards, because out of all the town names the goblins could have chosen, they felt this would be the least suspicious. While they wait, Josh takes a ride on a skateboard and comes upon an old warehouse. Inside, he finds the townspeople sitting through a passionate sermon on the evils of eating meat.
Flesh! And by flesh, I mean all that stinking, disgusting meat.
Soon after, he's captured and they try to force feed him melted ice cream as he sees their true identities. Luckily, his father rushes in just in time.
What are you doing to my son?
We were giving him some ice cream.
Back at the farmhouse, Credence drops in all neighborly-like with her special dish while Holly rushes out to confront Elliot. When Holly gets to the RV, Elliot comes out buttoning his shirt and acting kind of suspicious.
Holly, what a surprise.
Right? On their way home, Michael and Josh see Holly at the RV and pull over. Michael orders Holly into the car and tells Elliot that if he wants to talk to Holly, he'll have to leave Brent and come with them. And Brent looks crushed. Meanwhile, Drew finally stumbles into the church looking for Arnold and finds that he's been turned into a man plant. As he tries to drag Arnold out, Credence shows up, gives Drew a super punch, and takes a chainsaw to Arnold. Then, over at the farmhouse, the whole town is getting their party on.
We wanted to make up for the misunderstanding we had a little while ago.
Josh again tries to warn his family not to eat the weird food, but is quickly sent up to his room. Once there, he tries to summon his grandfather in the mirror, but Credence appears instead, turns into a goblin, and jumps out and attacks Josh. Then the grandfather appears somehow and chops the goblin's hand off. Then the goblin jumps back through the mirror, winds up back at the church, and turns back into Credence, Sans hand. Next, Josh and Gramps come up with a plan to stop all the partying downstairs, but this time it involves a fire extinguisher and a Molotov cocktail instead of Josh's preferred pee-pee method. But before they can jump into action, yoink, the preacher grabs the molly and uses his goblin powers to banish Grandpa. Grandpa's got one last trick up his sleeve though and snaps his finger, sending a lightning bolt at the Molotov cocktail. It explodes and engulfs the preacher in flames. When the party rushes outside to see what happened, the family finally learns the truth.
Oh my God, what is this?
He was one of us, and you killed him.
Back at the church, Credence uses her powers to make herself hot, then saunters over to the RV to hook up with Brent. They share some sexy corn and then popcorn happens. No clue. Next, the family decides to hold a seance to get back in touch with Grandpa, which they totally know how to do for some reason. Meanwhile, the townspeople wait outside to, I think, eat them. Sometimes people turn into plants and sometimes they turn into mushy goblin food, so I'm not sure. But during the ritual, Josh turns into a goblin. Then all the townspeople turn into goblins and come inside and start chasing the family. Then over at the church, we find that Josh wasn't turned into a goblin. He just somehow switched places with one and is now at the church because plot reasons. Also, his grandfather is there. Grandpa gives him a backpack with instructions to only open it when absolutely necessary. At the farmhouse, the goblins are closing in when suddenly Credence calls out to them from the RV. So the goblins leave. Back at the church, Grandpa and Josh are putting their hands on the stone wall because magic or something, and Grandpa tells Josh that only the power of goodness can defeat the goblins, and then he fades away. Then Credence is there with all the goblins. They attack Josh and try to get him to eat some green pudding, but Josh remembers the backpack.
A double-decker bologna sandwich!
So they could be stopped by the power of goodness or a double-decker bologna sandwich. I guess whichever's handier. Plus, that is decidedly not a double-decker bologna sandwich. That's just a sandwich with a shitload of bologna on it. A double-decker sandwich has an additional slice of bread in the middle. Then the rest of the family shows up and they all put their hands on the stone wall because that's how to make the power of goodness happen or something. Their combined power of goodnesses makes Credence and the goblins cover their faces in pain, throw up, drop to the floor, fall off balconies, a goblin's eyeball explodes. Then the family's pulling into their driveway back home. Inside, we get the most unbelievable scene in the entire movie when the mom talks about how tasty a red delicious apple is.
It's delicious.
Then Josh goes up to his room to take a nap, but after hearing some weird whispering, goes back downstairs and receives another message scrawled on a softball. He slowly walks to the kitchen and finds a bunch of goblins chowing down on his mother, who's been turned into a mushy green goo.
Do you want some, Joshua?
You think Josh will at least try it? Troll 2 was created by the Italian husband and wife team Claudio Fragasso and Rossella Drudi. I only mention the fact that they're Italian because, along with the small budget and the inexperienced talent, it had a huge impact on the film. While the film was shot on location in Morgan, Utah and featured an American cast, the filmmakers and most of the crew spoke little to no English, causing confusion and misunderstandings on the set. Even the script was written in a kind of translated academic English as opposed to a more natural conversational one. But reportedly, Fragasso, the director, refused to let his English-speaking cast ad-lib or clean up any of the script's dialogue. And speaking of the cast, even if the dialogue were written by Quentin Tarantino, it probably wouldn't have been delivered much better. Most of the actors were just people who showed up to be extras and wound up getting major parts. The father, played by Michael Hardy, was a dentist who showed up because he thought it might be fun. Don Packard, who played the store owner, was reportedly a patient at a nearby mental hospital during shooting, so not even really acting. Of course, the title of the movie, Troll 2, gets a lot of flack because the movie features goblins instead of trolls, but actually, the film was initially called Goblins. It's just that US distributors didn't feel it would do very well without a connection to an already established property. But fast forward 30 years later, and Troll 2 is more popular than Troll will ever be. It's considered one of the greatest bad movies ever made and has a huge dedicated cult following that line up for midnight screenings across the country. There's also a fantastic 2009 documentary called Best Worst Movie about the making of Troll 2, directed by none other than Josh himself, Michael Stevenson. So Troll 2, is it watchable? For those who love movies that are so bad they're good or oddball cinematic curiosities, Troll 2 is a must-see. For everyone else, it's also a must-see. When your friends tell you you have to see a movie because it's so bad it's good, this is the kind of movie they're talking about. In fact, Troll 2 is a kind of perfect storm of all the things that go into making a bad movie great. Bad special effects? Check. Ridiculous costumes? Check. Terrible acting?
Oh my God!
Check. God-awful dialogue?
What are you going to do to me, Daddy?
Tighten my belt by one loop so I don't feel hunger pains.
Guys, this movie has it all, and it's fascinating. Much like Tommy Wiseau's The Room, you sit there wondering how this movie can even exist. But unlike The Room, Troll 2 didn't have a delusional madman to will it into existence by throwing millions of his own money at it. Just the fact that something like this can get made and find distribution must make struggling up-and-coming filmmakers' heads explode. But for the rest of us, Troll 2 is like a gift from the bad movie gods. It's a fun movie to watch, it's a fun movie to watch with friends, it's a fun movie to throw on in the background of a party. It's just a fun movie. Well, that's all I've got. Join me next time when I check out Halle Berry squeezing into some black latex in 2004's Catwoman. And if you like these videos, do us a solid. Subscribe.